Very fun. This is like the first time, like this is the first underdog team like Cincinnati that's actually not built like that gimmicky offense. Like they actually just kind of run a normal offense, not like the UCFs where we're running up tempo, fast pace, all that nonsense.
I do agree that
Thanks. Yeah, good. Hey guys, welcome into our college football prize picks and college football live before lock show. I'm your host, Jordan Vanek. You can follow me on Twitter at Jordan Vanek DFS. My co-host, Matt Gajewski, you can follow him at _Matt Gajewski. This game, or we got two games to talk about, and if you're new to prize picks, be sure to download that app, and we're going to be talking some great plays today. If you're new, use code Awesemo. We'll match up to $100 on your first deposit. If you don't know what PrizePicks is, it's basically a site where you can pick 5 player props. And right now they have a promo. If you go 5 for 5, you 22x on your money. Fantastic promo for the New Year's Eve. If you're new to it, great spot to get in. And we'll be matching up to $100. So you can get, some free money. And if we hit today, it'll be fantastic for you. But Matt, how are you doing? How has your bowl season been?
Doing good, man. It's been really busy, but we are winding down here. As you guys know, the college football playoff is finally here, the moment we've all been waiting for. So I'm really excited. Also really excited for some New Year's Day games tomorrow, but let's get into it.
Yeah, no, let's get into it. We'll finally see the SEC team start to care about football because, they only try to show up in the big ones. But let's get into it with your first prop with Desmond Ridder over 19.5 rushing yards. Tell me why you like it.
So first of all, there's going to be a common theme with a lot of these Cincinnati guys we talk about, and it's the conference they play in, the AAC. They haven't really been tested this year. And because of that, the Cincinnati offense has taken their foot off the gas. This was a problem for them really early on in the season, kind of till they got slapped in the face by the College Football Playoff Committee, and they were ranked like 7th or something the first time these rankings came out, even though they were undefeated through like 7 or 8 games. And then after that, they started putting their foot on the gas a little bit. So first things first, Ridder hasn't been seeing the same opportunity he saw in previous years. He's actually on pace for a career low in rushing yards. And I don't think that has anything to do with him or his ability. He's still very mobile, strong rusher. I think it mainly has to do with them beating up on some very weak competition throughout the season and not really needing to use Ridder on the ground. I actually think he's a better rusher than he is passer. So this is a spot where, especially if the game is competitive, which Vegas, you and I both expect it to be, over 19.5 rushing yards is really low. Even if you just take his career averages, he projects right around 30.
Yeah, I mean, the only concern I have for it is obviously the sacks and being the negative rushing yards, but I just don't think they're going to.
Alabama's good.
and that, but I also just don't believe that like the offense is going to try to put too many deep shots or emphasis on that side of the ball. I think they'll be trying to use more design runs and just getting the balls to the best player out in space. So I agree with you on the over 19.5 rushing yards.
Yeah, I think that's the sharp side of this.
Yeah, but moving along to my next prop, we've got Blake Corum over 42.5 rushing yards now. It was 40 a few moments ago when I bet it, but now they moved it up 2 yards. Blake Corum has basically hit this every single game that he's actually been in this year. Before the injury, he was almost in a 50-50 timeshare with Hassan Haskins. And I understand that Georgia is a different animal against the run, but this Michigan rushing attack, this is what they're going to do. And I think that you'll see north of 15 to 16 carries for him. Our projections that are made by you have the over as well. I think you have him at like 60 rushing yards, I believe. So again, I know Georgia's run defense has been stout, but Corum has gotten a ton of work when fully healthy, and these few weeks off has allowed him to do so.
Yeah, this is volatile, and I'll say it's because of the injury. So kind of just laying the land out here. Corum was better than Haskins when they were both healthy. He's averaging more yards per carry. He's the sort of lightning to Hassan Haskins' thunder. A lot of people like to kind of project backs in that way. Corum's your smaller back. He's your pass catching back, scat back, explosive back. It's just that when he got hurt, Haskins played so well. And maybe this was just easing Corum back into action. I'm not entirely sure. Corum just hasn't seen the work over the last 2 weeks. So that is kind of the bear case if you don't want to look at Corum here. I'm with you on the bull case because Corum's actually been better than Haskins throughout the entire year. I tend to think they rushed him back. The final games for Michigan this year were super, super important. So they needed him at any capacity they could possibly get him out there. He's basically at a month off now. So that lower body injury should be much, much healthier at this point. I'm expecting closer to a 50-50 timeshare. And even if it's 60-40 in favor of Haskins, Corum should still have some looks here. So I do agree with you in this spot.
Yeah, and I know that the Georgia program has had some COVID issues. We'll see what injuries kind of come out or different things. But that's going to be the biggest news to pay attention to in this slate, because some of these bowl games just very late with reporting injuries, and college football is just kind of a mess in that regard. So I'm interested to see who Georgia will be without or who they'll be with, and same thing on the Michigan side. But moving on to the next pick that we both actually share, I like Brian Robinson's over 85.5 yards rushing in this game. Cincinnati is underdogs, and when Alabama has had the lead, they've used Robinson a lot more. Robinson hasn't been healthy since like week 8, but this time off allowed him to do so. And when you look at this like Georgia game that Alabama just played, they were attacking down the field. I think Cincinnati is going to keep two safeties back. I think they're going to allow Alabama to have a lighter box, which is going to allow Brian Robinson to run more freely. And every time that Brian Robinson has had at least 20 carries, he's hit well over the 85 rushing mark. Most of his games are in the 100 yards. So that is why I like the over for Brian Robinson in rushing.
Yeah, I agree. And it comes down to basically a position by attrition here. They lost Roydell Williams. He had knee surgery towards the end of the year. They lost Jace McClellan very early in the year. So you just have Robinson and Trey Sanders. And when games have been competitive, they've fully given Robinson an elite workload. We're talking like 25 carries plus. When you're attacking Cincinnati, the best way to do so is on the ground. They have a good pass defense, and their run defense is too. It's just a little bit weaker. They're allowing 141 yards per game. And for a team that's undefeated, that's kind of suspect, especially when you consider the conference they play in. Basically, the 11 players on the offensive side of the ball for Alabama are going to be like the top 50, inside the top 15 to 20 players that these Cincinnati kids have faced in their careers. So I think that's going a little overlooked at this point.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you in that regard. And I mean, you like Brian Robinson over the rushing yards, your projections have him in the 99. So we got like a 15-yard cushion. And then his receiving is also a part of it, which he has been utilized as a receiver in this game with no Mechie. You like the over at 22.5 receiving yards as well.
Yeah, they throw to their backs a ton. On the year, he's averaging 22 receiving yards. And a lot of these are in games where they kill their opponents. I mean, over the last 3 games, 3.5 targets per game. They've even taken their foot off the gas in some of those. Robinson, he has a very good receiving projection here. And I think just with the workload, like all of these props on Robinson kind of bake in that Cincinnati needs to keep it competitive. If they don't, you're going to see more Trey Sanders. But right now I do projections according to the spread, and it's just 2 touchdowns, which is close enough for Robinson to see elevated work. So that's where I'm going. I think basically overs on all of Robinson's props are live today. Receiving, rushing, if you can find receptions, things like that, which you can on PrizePicks, I think all of them are live.
Yeah, no, I completely agree to that standpoint. Again, if Alabama is going to win by 14 plus points, I expect Robinson to get to the 20 carry mark, and he can do the receiving work early on in the game. So both of these props are definitely something that I have some interest to. And if you're new to, Awesemo and stuff like that, we got some free tools for you guys to use. We have the NFL player projections, NBA ownership rankings, NHL top stacks, free to use, free to look at, some fantastic tools to get a hold of, just like, Matt's projections over there for our college football bowl season. He's been killing it, even though we've dealt with a lot of cancellations and stuff like that. But let's get into, Matt, your next pick here. You've got Ladd McConkey under 20.5 receiving yards. You don't like McConkey today, huh?
I'm not the biggest fan of McConkey. He's actually had a really good year, played way above expectation. It's a guy that averages 33 yards per game. He actually saw 33 targets in the year, which ranks 3rd on the Georgia team. And he was pretty explosive, 430 total yards. The problem is McConkey was a part-time player when everybody was hurt. And now you're basically getting back the entire Georgia team put an asterisk next to this because of the COVID outbreak. So we don't know who's playing or not. There's a chance that maybe McConkey plays a larger role if there's absences, which we just don't have that information. But if everybody's healthy, we're talking about like the return of Dominic Blaylock, George Pickens. Like so many of these receivers were hurt throughout the year. Even guys like Kearis Jackson and Jermaine Burton, all of them missed so much time. McConkey was basically like a third string receiver when the season started. And with all these guys returning, I took a look at the routes run. It's reflected there. McConkey's down around 30%. He was upwards of 70% earlier in the year. Now, he's still seen 2 targets in each of the last 4 games. But again, Georgia hasn't necessarily been in the most competitive spots in that span. So I think McConkey, if the game is close, you might even see him as low as like 15% of the route, something like that. Not to mention, Georgia has 2 phenomenal tight ends. And when you're in 12 personnel, I don't think McConkey cracks the field. So it's a tough ask for him to get there. Obviously, one big play could do it, which makes this risky, but he's just not seeing the field enough for this prop.
No, I agree with you there. George Pickens being out for most of the year has really dictated a lot of that passing game and opened up the roles for some of these dudes. If he's playing at 100%, which we finally got to see more of him against Alabama, then Pickens is going to take majority of that role. And with this over-under at only 44.5 points, I just don't see the passing volume to be that much between these two teams who are fantastic on both sides of or defense on both sides.
That's another thing too. If this game plays to the spread, which is 7.5 currently, Michigan took some money after the COVID outbreak for Georgia. It was originally sitting at -10, -9.5. So if Georgia's healthy, I think there's a chance this spikes up towards the Bulldogs again around kickoff. But if it plays to the spread and Georgia's winning this game, we know how they're going to play. They're going to be run heavy, which doesn't work in McConkey's favor either.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But let's get into one of our more controversial picks here today with Alec Pierce over 65.5 receiving yards. My side of this is the over. Matt has him projected a little less at 58 receiving yards, but Pierce has 26 targets of over 20 yards down the field, which is the highest amongst any of the Cincinnati players. This is going to be a negative game script. They're down 14 points. I'm not a big fan of this corner, but the Alabama did lose Josh Jobe, who is a big-bodied, physical type of guy who I imagine would be matched up with Pierce in this game. And Pierce has been their best receiver all year. He's hit the over on this prop 6 times this year. He averages 2.63 yards per route run. I just think that he has the ability to catch that, make that big play for Cincinnati, even though it's going to be contested coverage. He just goes up and gets it. Matt, I know you're not a fan, but that is why I like Alec Pierce over the 65.5 rushing or receiving yards.
Yeah, I have him projected under, but it's a stay away from me. I wouldn't take the under because of everything you outlined. He's a downfield big play threat. So even on just a few targets, he could break this, which is why this is one that I just wouldn't want to bet. But ultimately, he projects a little bit worse than his prop here. It's the toughest matchup of his career.
I agree to that point.
But you can say that for every single player other than Jerome Ford.
Yeah, I mean, Jerome Ford comes from Bama, so
exactly. He's played against real people. Like
real people.
How many NFL players has Alec Pierce faced? Like 3 in his career, maybe.
I think he might have played Mike Hughes.
I don't know.
I think
he's been there for a while. Like I'd have to go back. Like the guy's like 26 years old, so I'd have to go back to when I was in college to find out everybody he's played.
Yeah, so something like that. I know he hasn't played too much elite talent. I agree to that as standpoint. I just his size and speed and just ability to get the downfield targets is where I like it. But moving along to a prop that we both can agree on, Slade Bolden over 3 receptions on PrizePicks. With Mechie gone from this Alabama lineup, I really do believe Slade Bolden's going to be a key target on our 3rd downs and 5, 3rd and 6, and a lot of the short intermediate routes. He's the only other receiver with 40 targets on the year. He hasn't hit over 3 catches a lot, but he hasn't also played with Mechie a ton. Mechie leaves a 28 target share percentage on the year up for grabs. I truly believe that Bolden will see upwards of like 7 to 8 targets, which I believe you have him projected, and he'll get to the 5 to 6 type of catch mark.
Bolden is just a part-time player on the year, but when they've sustained injuries, like Jamison Williams, when he got a targeting penalty one time really early in the game, anytime there's absences in the receiver corps, Slade Bolden turns from like a 50% snap share player to 100. Like he plays every single snap. He is the next man up for this receiving corps. but he's still projected like that 50% snap share player. And again, this is going to be somewhat reliant on Cincinnati keeping the game close enough for them to be just not, hammering Sanders and Robinson every single play. But right now, Bolden in an every down role, this is a really low prop for him. So I am in full agreement. And even if they do get up in this game by 2 or 3 scores, there's also the chance that, Bryce Young and this offense get it done through the air. And in that instance, I think this is still a good prop to take.
Yeah, I mean, Alabama has a 53%, pass rate on the year. It's actually the highest amongst any team on the slate today currently, but it's one of those props that I do believe it's factored in that he's considered a part-time player, and maybe people believe that JoJo Early might take a little bit of work away from him, but I believe he's the dude that just kind of gets those. He's not going to get a ton of receiving yards. Like I originally was looking at that 37.5 receiving yard prop, but decided to go away and go to the reception prop because I just think that's the type of role he's going to have in this offense.
If you want to just talk like specific roles, he's more of a gadgety type player. So I do agree with you in that instance. He's not used down the field like Jamison Williams or someone like that.
Yeah, but moving on to one of the last props we've got before we go to the live before lock portion of the show. Brock Bowers over 4 receptions for you. I actually really like this prop because he's one of the best tight ends in the entire country.
Yeah, there's a case that he might be the best. He's a true freshman. He is like one of the most athletic human beings on the planet. I don't know if you've seen some of the tracking data from college football, but there's this one play where Brock Bowers basically takes a slant and he runs it all just straight up the middle of a defense. I can't even remember who they played, but he reached like 22 miles an hour on that, which is like an absurd speed for even a small receiver. But this guy's a big tight end, receiving tight end at Georgia. And what I really want to highlight here is he's the only player that's playing every single snap in competitive games. That goes for running backs, receivers. He's the only one. He had 15 targets against Alabama. No one else on the team had more than 5. So there's clearly like a game plan for him to get him the ball and see what he can do in space. Again, this is going to be reliant on Michigan keeping the game competitive. If it's not, you're going to see Brock Bowers like in a 50% snap share. But as long as the game's competitive, Brock Bowers is one of the best receiving roles on the slate.
And I mean, Michigan hasn't exactly faced any tight ends of this caliber that I can think of from the Big Ten conference at all. Brock Bowers is one of those dudes. Like, there's not many tight ends who get 100 receiving yards in any game of their collegiate career. Brock Bowers has 4 games of over 100 yards receiving this year. He's been a ridiculous athlete for Georgia, and definitely, I think him and Pickens are the 2 best positional players in that game for me personally, from like an NFL standpoint.
Dude, Brock Bowers was the 3rd string tight end when the season started.
Yeah.
How crazy is that?
It's like Braylon Allen. It's like watching him last night.
I cannot believe how good this kid is.
Oh yeah,
like Kirby's got to, for all the success Kirby's had, he's got to get like an assistant that helps him evaluate talent. Because how many times have we seen him just like fully just mess up kids' careers or lose players to the portal? And in this case, he lucked into Brock Bowers, but I mean, like, get it together, man.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Georgia never they see the freshman tag and immediately like, yeah, dude, you're not playing for at least a year. Like, we just won't play you. Like, I don't care if you're the best player. I mean, they committed to Jake Fromm instead of playing Justin Fields, which is a whole other story in itself. But that's all we got for the prize picks portion of the show. I don't, Matt, do you have any other picks that you want to hit on?
I actually want to ask you a question. And so, well, there's two parts to this. The first one is George Pickens' role. I think there's a chance that some of these guys that are either they were injured themselves or they're affected by injury, I think mainly the Mechie situation, could be values because they're in uncertain roles. Pickens actually has a prop on here, like across the board. You'll be able to find receiving yards, receptions on Pickens. I thought it was a little rich at 44 yards, 44 and a half, that is, but there's a chance that he's just their number 1 receiver. Like, he played about 30% of the snaps against Bama, which is really low, but he was targeted 5 times, which was tied for 2nd most on the team. When this guy is on the field, like Bowers, they clearly have a plan for him. So if he's now at an extra month to recover from the ACL, which he tore in the spring game. If Pickens is like a 75% snap share player, he might see 12 targets.
Yeah, no, I agree. I thought that line was like, when I looked at it, I was thinking of Pickens in more of a full-time role, that a set 44 over under is really low. I honestly would love to see JT Daniels get snaps with him because I think that would be the difference between me wanting to play that or not. Obviously, Bennett's going to get the start and is supposed to start this game. But if this game gets out of hand for Georgia and they're not moving the ball offensively, we could see JT Daniels step in. And that's where I would be more in agreement of taking the over on Pickens. It's just his role limitation. Like, unless news comes out that he's like, yep, nope, fully good to go, I think I would be staying away from the 44-yard mark.
Yeah, he's projected towards the under for me, but obviously that's based on a really small sample this year where he's in a rotational role. We don't know the health, and then they're a run first offense to begin with. But if you went back and ran this projection from the first year of his career or last year, I think he would be way above this number. So just a really volatile spot, but I wanted to talk about him. And the last one I wanted to talk about was just Bama's offense. You can find some pretty weird props, but PrizePicks only offers Jamison Williams, Slade Bolden, the main receivers. I think there's a chance that they go into more 12 personnel, and I'm not sure who that would affect. I don't think Jamison comes off the field at all, but I think there's a chance that Bolden might. Probably unlikely, but I don't know. We already talked about Bolden a lot, and it seems like you're pretty confident towards the over, as am I, but that's the only worry I have.
Yeah, I just think that the role between some of the Bama players has been up in the air for the other guys. I feel like Saban just kind of goes with who he trusts more, and I think Slade Bolden has earned that his time at Alabama, and JoJo Early, and some of these guys are better playmakers than Slade Bolden, but it's a tricky offense. I mean, I was really upset that they didn't have anything for Jaleel Billingsley on the site because I really would have been interested into his props because there's going to be someone that takes what Mechie's role was. I think Bolden has a good chance, and I think Billingsley are the two receivers that have the best chance to take most of Mechie's role, and then some of the down the field stuff you have early, and you have some of the rotational receivers that we've seen from the Auburn game and throughout all of Alabama's play this year.
Yeah, I do agree with you for the most part on that, but yeah, you can't capitalize on props on PrizePicks, unfortunately, but just an interesting situation. But I think that's all I have with PrizePicks right now for the most part. I think we got it all.
Of course, we got games tomorrow, but right now we're just talking college football playoffs. But let's move over to our live before lock. We got give you a few extra minutes for breaking down positions, certain things, talk about some strategy, which is going to be fantastic because 2-game slates get a little tricky, and I've got some different opinions that I think you'll be interested in. But let's start off with our quarterback position here. We've got 4 quarterbacks on the slate. Is there any chance that you're getting away from Bryce Young on any slate today?
I'm going to check my exposures right now, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I have 100% Bryce Young.
I was because when I looked at this, I was like, I don't think there's a chance I get away from Bryce Young because there's just not many players on the slate that are above that, threshold of 8K. I think Bryce Young, there's 3 players above 8K on the entire slate.
Yeah, so that's the thing. It's not hard to pay for him. He's expensive in a vacuum, but in the context of this slate, he's not hard to get to whatsoever. He ran a little bit against Georgia, 3 carries for 40 yards. That finally put him in the positives for rushing yards in the year. And it's a guy that was recruited as a dual threat, but for whatever reason, he just doesn't run. And I think that's fine. He's still good as a passer. He doesn't necessarily need to. The bear case for Bryce Young is he's facing Cincinnati's pass defense, and they're supposed to be elite. I know they have some high draft picks like Bryant, Sauce Gardner, and Myjai Sanders, good edge rusher, but Bryce Young's the best player that any of them have faced in their careers, without question, by tenfold.
Oh yeah, no, with Bryce Young, I remember before we did our conference championship, I was saying that Georgia had never faced an NFL quarterback, and when you get an NFL caliber quarterback onto a college football field, everything kind of gets thrown out the window.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say where you see Trevor Lawrence beat Alabama by 30. Bryce Young or Mac Jones and Alabama beat some of these teams by 30 last year in the college football playoffs. Bryce Young has the ability to put up 50 on any given team at any point. It's just going to be about pressure and if they decide that they're just going to play 8 in coverage the whole game. But with Brian Robinson, it's just I think they're not going to be able to do that the whole game. I think they're going to try to, and Bama's going to run on them early on.
Right. I mean, you can't play 8 in coverage against Bama. Like Brian Robinson's going to pick you apart. They could just, it flat out can't work. So I kind of see this as like a losing situation for Cincinnati either way. And I mean, like Bama has a great offense to target quarterbacks. They are extremely up tempo. They're extremely pass heavy. And I don't think it necessarily matters how many they drop back in coverage. Like they could just throw the ball to Brian Robinson too. So, I mean, on a slate with only 4 quarterbacks, and we'll talk about some of the iffy guys, like Bryce Young is just, he's a locked in option for me. I don't really see a way around it. Unless you're just playing like the massive field tournaments, and if you don't play Bryce Young, I think you lock Brian Robinson, and then maybe you stack the second game, which is surely to be contrarian. And one last thing on like Cincinnati's pass defense, like they're getting disrespected by bookmakers. Alabama has a 35.5 implied team total. They're going to score 5 touchdowns if this plays to the spread. Like that, the best secondary in the country doesn't allow 5 touchdowns.
No, I agree. I think bookmakers made that switch after watching Bama versus Georgia, and I mean, all week as an Alabama fan, I had to hear about Georgia's almighty defense. It was real fun, to say the least. Of what
Georgia has a better defense than Cincinnati.
Oh yeah,
I can guarantee you that.
Oh yeah, no, Georgia got hit in the mouth in a way they haven't been hit all year, and I expect if Georgia can get by Michigan, you're going to get a lot different of a game. They're not going to let Bryce Young or Jameson Williams try to get that 30, 40-yard play again. If you take away that, it's a much different type of ball game, and it's hard to take away, but I expect Kirby Smart to be able to figure it out. But with the other quarterbacks on the slate, you got Ritter at 7,700, Bennett at 75, and Caden McNamara at 55. This is the ugliest group of second quarterbacks I think I have seen on a slate all year long, and that includes Maction. I was like looking at this slate for large field tournament stuff, and I think there's a really good way to not just play one quarterback today and just play Bryce Young.
I don't love that because there's not any good running backs, really. There's only one good running back play. So
it's fair.
Like, I don't know where you go. And that certainly could win a tournament, because like the second game, which we'll talk about, Michigan, Georgia, is just like, it's so low in the total. The teams are so run heavy, and none of like, they both use committees. So unless one guy scores all the touchdowns, and that happens in multiple places on this slate. I don't know. It's I think a 2 quarterback build wins just because there's so many bad offenses.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking like you get like some upside with like if you can find a way to playing Haskins and Corum, because both of them have had success together on multiple games this year. I mean, it's definitely like a tricky slate, but I just feel like you can get unique by doing the 1 quarterback build and key in on some of the superstars. Obviously, if you have the chance to play, I guess depends on how you build it, but like Ritter versus Haskins, Ritter has just a much higher floor just because of him being a quarterback and being involved in every play. I guess
I agree with that.
It's just a tough slate with that regard. But out of the 3 quarterbacks below, do you have any preference between the 3? Like obviously Ritter because his upside, or Bennett with his rushing side as well?
Yeah, so you bring up a good point. They're both mobile. The price difference between them is negligible. Ritter's 200 more on DraftKings. If you want to talk FanDuel, it's Ritter's cheaper, so he's clearly the better play in my opinion over there. But he's just a little more mobile than Stetson, which kind of breaks the tie for me. Their team totals are about the same, and I think for like Stetson to reach his ceiling, they need to be playing from behind, because it's a pretty decent defense they'll be facing in Michigan. I know they have their weaknesses, but like Stetson might get pulled in this game, which is another issue. So if you're playing just low risk contest, cash contest, it's Ritter for me. Just the safety he provides. We know Ritter's not getting pulled. He's supposed to be an NFL quarterback to some degree, and he's mobile. So he's the difference, but I definitely have Stetson lineups. The Georgia team has a higher implied team total. They were upwards of 10-point favorites early in the week. There's easy ways to stack Stetson. So those are the 2 guys I do like as the second and third option in that order. McNamara is a pretty distant 4th because he doesn't run at all, and he plays on a team that has a 40% pass rate. But if this plays to the spread, we've seen McNamara actually be efficient when playing from behind. Against Michigan State, he played well. That was really the only time he was in a game script like that. But we know Michigan's going to change their pass rate drastically if they're playing from behind. We've seen it in previous years. Last year in 2020, Michigan was throwing the ball over 50% of the time, and they have the same OC in Gaddis. So that's something that could happen. It's actually more in the range of possibility today than it has been most of the year. So I still have some McNamara too. He's just my, I guess, fourth option in terms of who I prefer.
Yeah. And I was talking to you earlier in the show, and I believe that you agreed with me that if you're playing the single game slate, I think there is a way that you do see Bennett get benched and JT Daniels come in and JT Daniels be on a winning type of lineup. Obviously, do not play that in cash game builds. It's more a complete large field stuff for the single game slate. But I really think that Bennett against Michigan with their pass rushers and just some of the turnover plays that can be available, because Bennett's been really good at taking care of the ball this year compared to last, which is why he's held on to the job. At that halftime type of switch, I could see JT Daniels coming in if they need to score some points on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and that's a risk. And it's especially a risk too, because I think for any Georgia quarterback to hit their ceiling, they need to be from behind. Otherwise, they're going to be running the ball. Well, what happens if you're playing from behind? Means you probably had a bad first half. So in that situation, I do think it's more likely we do see some Daniels, which obviously do not love for DFS purposes.
So so I think we're both on the same page of Bryce Young being a lock for the quarterback position. And then I think my preference is Ritter, McNamara, and then Bennett for me personally, just because I have the strong feeling that Bennett has a chance to get benched. And again, I think I'm leaning towards one quarterback builds today just for the large field GPP and just uniqueness of it. Obviously, a little bit different than you in this regard, but that is, I think, all we have for quarterbacks. Anything else you want to add?
Nope, we are all good.
Okay, let's move on to the running back position. At the top, you got Hassan Haskins, Jerome Ford, and Brian Robinson. All three of these running backs are over 6,000. And then you've got basically the Georgia backs between Cook, Zamir White, 5K 4,800, Blake Corum at 44. And is there any running back that you have any interest in sub 4,400?
It's pretty dicey down there. I think you're playing large field tournaments, throwing complete darts if you do get to that range. So I'm going to say no. Under 4,400, or did you say 4K?
4,400, because Corum and Sanders, I think you obviously have some interest in.
Sanders is 41. Field.
Yeah.
So he's like the cutoff. Otherwise, like I think if Georgia absolutely annihilates Michigan, you'll see some of the Kenny McIntosh, Kendall Milton. He should be active today. Those kind of guys, but it's still a 4-man rotation. So not too much interest. No.
Not too much interest. Okay. So at the top, I'm assuming Brian Robinson is your favorite play of the day, with implied total being so high, Alabama giving him a lot of the work when they have leads, especially in a big game like this, and Cincinnati's run defense being the weak point.
You are absolutely correct, and it is not even close. He is far and away the best running back play on the slate. Implied team total matchup works in his favor, and you don't really have anybody else on the slate with this workload. So it's him, and he is the 1A, and you're pretty far dropped before you get to somebody that you like even remotely close to him.
With the Jerome Ford, do you have much interest in him in this game, or is it someone that you are looking to stay away from? Because I believe he's going to be the second most popular running back on the entire slate, and you're looking at a 7,200 price tag against Alabama. They still have an implied total higher than Michigan, even though they're 14-point underdogs. But between him and Haskins, I guess, who would you prefer to get to?
I'm underweight on them both pretty significantly too. Like I don't even think I have a Haskins share on the day, not a single one, which kind of tells you how I feel about them both. But they're both sizable underdogs, which is the main reason here. And Ford does come with pretty decent ownership. Again, salary's not really too constricting, so you can play Ford. But I'm trying to take some shots on these teams that have high implied totals. And like Bama onslaughts in particular are in play. So like I'm prioritizing both Bama skill position players, Jamison Williams and Brian Robinson. I think getting them both on your team makes a lot of sense with Alabama's 35.5 implied team total. Cincinnati is sitting at 21.5. So you're just seeding a ton of like volume at that position in negative game script for Ford. Not to mention he's more expensive than Robinson, which is just laughable on the slate. But for contrarian builds, I mean, if you have the salary and you're going cheap, say you're going contrarian with Alabama pass catchers and you're just looking for a run back and you didn't play Jameson Williams, I think Ford makes some sense because he is active in the pass game a little bit. But man, his volume leaves a lot to be desired. Like, for example, at 7,200, his volume isn't too different than like Blake Corum when he's fully healthy.
Yeah. And I think that you're getting with Jerome Ford, Ritter's going to take a little bit more rushing than he has most of the year. Like Ritter hasn't been utilized in the ground as much, but against Alabama, I think they'll have a little bit more design runs and scrambles and stuff like that. So I agree with you on the Ford take. I think my preference at the running back position is actually Corum with Robinson, just because I believe that Corum's healthy and just the better back compared to Haskins. And at 4,400, I think he does more in the passing game. And then the third running back for me is James Cook over Zamir White. What are you doing with the Georgia backfield?
I agree with you right now. There's two reasons. One, James Cook is the much better pass catcher than Zamir White, and it is not close. Like, James Cook has played a role in the slot at times this year for Georgia. He's a phenomenal pass catcher. He's related to Dalvin Cook. We've seen these guys both catch the ball extremely well in their careers. So James, I think, is a priority. And then from there, in the offense, that is, not necessarily for DFS. But in the offense, we've now seen James Cook out carry Zamir White in in 3 straight games, And most importantly, he out carried Zamir White in the SEC championship against Georgia. Like, that was a game they lost. They were trying to remain competitive in the game and preserve their undefeated season, which they were unable to do so. But James Cook playing over Zamir White, I think it makes a lot of sense. He's been efficient on the year. He's a good pass catcher. They're very close in price. And I'm not sure where ownership's going to go, to be honest with you. I think Zamir might end up being a little contrarian. So I still did play some Zamir, but James Cook's the preference for me. Ultimately, it's a 4-man backfield, but they kind of narrowed their rotation pretty substantially. Like, you didn't see too much Kenny McIntosh in the last game. Kendall Milton might be back today, but I don't know. Cook is my preference. But if you add Corum into this mix, I do think Corum is really interesting here as a 4,400 timeshare back.
Yeah, and like with Blake Corum and James Cook, both of these guys have that ability to take that 50-yard carry, that 60-yard touchdown run. But if they get in open space, they're two very fast running backs. While your Zamir White, Trey Sanders are in this range where they're touchdown dependent. Like, I don't think Zamir White has many games where he gets to the 90-yard rushing mark or 80-yard rushing mark against the Michigan defense, while James Cook can get the 10 carries or 11 touches and find his way to 100 yards total.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Like, Corum, he's a guy that was like 6.5K earlier in the year. And obviously the role has changed because of injury, but if he's close to that role, man, like, there's just so much potential value here at 4,400. And the thing is, like, you're taking a risk playing any of these backs. It's basically Brian Robinson, and then every single back you're considering the rest of the way has risks. There's no gimmies. So I like just saving the salary with Corum too, and knowing that he can catch balls. Like, even with the injury, Corum still has more targets than Haskins on the year. Still. And Haskins played 2 full games without him, and then 3 additional games where Corum missed most of the time.
Yeah, no, I agree to that point. And like, I usually use like a Z-score metric, which is just how much better than you are than the average. And Brian Robinson is the only running back with a 2 Z-score. The next closest is Ford with 1 based off of your projections. And he's also the top value on the entire slate. I was shocked that he's not 8,800. I thought that was a typo by you when I pulled over the sheet from Awesemo.com to check out the projections. I was like, wait a minute. And then come to find out I'm seeing 6,800. I'm like, he's like the lock. And for me, I think my preference is either James Cook and Blake Corum, or Blake Corum for the 2 running back builds. And for 3 running back builds, I think you can go to both of them. And I just believe that they have the big playability and take away, like, they make those plays that are just difference makers. And especially against Michigan's defense, where they've been just really good all year long, James Cook gets to spread them out wide. And we saw Michigan get beat up by Kenneth Walker. I believe Kenneth Walker, he had 5 touchdowns in that game or something crazy?
He balled out.
Yeah, like, obviously Heisman caliber running back. These guys are not on that caliber, but Michigan's path to being bad has been through the running game. And I think you can get away with it with James Cook on the edge.
Yeah, I do agree with you. James Cook, I'm going to check my running back ownership right now. He's my second most owned back on this afternoon slate.
Yes. See,
and I'm only playing 5.
Yeah, you're only
also playing 40
5.
lineups just for context. I'm not running 150.
Well, how could you, Matt? You spent all this time in projections. You're not doing 150 lineups. What kind of person are you?
A person that doesn't have that much time, man. When I can run 150, I do, but it's a time constraint thing for me.
Yeah, but moving along with receivers, you got Jameson Williams at the top for 8,800. Tight end Brock Bowers 7,000, and then Alec Pierce at 6K, sneaking out the top range. I know how you feel about Pierce, but it's again another situation where it feels like onslaughting Alabama is where everybody's going. I think if you fade one of these guys, you end up getting contrarian. Are you getting away from Jameson Williams at any volume?
Nope. I am playing 95% Jameson Williams. He is in 38 of my 40 lineups, and I do not know the ones he's not in. But I imagine they have Brian Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, it's Jameson Williams again. He's 8,800, but on this slate, there's not many receivers that are projected that highly. Looking through your projections, you actually have no other receiver projected 7 targets, just because of how awful these receiving cores are as a whole of just trying to find where the targets are going. Bowers, I think, is the best receiver for Georgia, but again, Georgia throws the ball not too often, and with 6 other guys that can technically get targets in this game, especially with the over-under being so low, we're not going to see a ton of work in the passing game. At the top, I guess, how much do you have of Bowers?
I do have a decent amount of Bowers. So his raw overall just exposure, my lineup is just 10%, but very targeted lineups, specifically with him. I'm pretty sure he's in all Stetson stacks or the run back on stacks that actually have McNamara. I actually have more Pickens than Bowers, and that's a price play. There is a little bit of cost prohibitiveness on this slate. Not much, but there's a little bit. It's very difficult to play Bryce Young, Ritter, Bowers, Jameson Williams, and Brian Robinson. You can't do that. So you do have to make some concessions when you play Bowers. Not a ton, but you can't just lock in all these studs everywhere. So that's kind of why I'm a little underweight on Bowers. He might not even be this own though. I don't know who is going to be trying to lock in Bowers over Jameson Williams.
Oh yeah, no, I don't think there's many lineups that become optimal without Jameson Williams, just because of just looking at the receivers on the slate. The only receiver that I think rivals Jameson Williams, for me, I guess, is George Pickens if he was 100% healthy. And even then, George obviously doesn't throw too much. I think it would need George Pickens with JT Daniels, and then I could say there's a chance. But other than that, there's not many receivers in the slate that we've dealt with throughout the whole entire year where they've been able to get a ton of targets. In terms of targets, again, you have 3 players projected 6 targets. Jameson Williams is projected 12. There's no Mechie
either, dude.
Exactly. No, looking at his targets, you're he's getting double the work as any other player in the slate. So yes, double the price. He's player to lock in. But let's move towards the lower range of things. You got a lot of Michigan receivers in that 5K range with Andrell Anthony, Cornelius Johnson, and then you got Jermaine Burton and Slade Bolden to round out the 5K. How are you feeling about this price range of receivers?
Not very good. I think the best plays in this range, Cornelius at 4.7 is pretty good. He requires negative game script to get there. We've seen games where he has 12 targets and then games where he has 2. So it depends if Georgia's leading in this game or not. And Georgia doesn't really have anybody I'm interested in this range. All the players that are priced in this range, like Ladd McConkey, Jermaine Burton, are priced. Burton's actually a pretty relevant player, so maybe you could take a look at him as a contrarian option. But McConkey's priced at a point where this is on a 75% snap share, but McConkey hasn't been playing that role. He's down at 30%. So he's really tough for me to get to. The Cincinnati receivers are all expensive compared to what their roles are. So Tyler Scott's not somebody I have a ton of interest in. And Slade, he by default, I think, is the best option you can really talk about. He had 8 targets when Mechie went down in the SEC championship, he's going to play every single snap. So by default, I guess he's really the only guy I have a ton of interest in the spot. Otherwise, I think you go down to Cornelius Johnson for a contrarian play for Michigan.
Yeah, I was looking at that range too, and I was thinking I'm not playing many guys from this range. Like even Slade Bolden, I think he has a decent chance to get over the 3 catch mark on PrizePicks, but I don't believe he's going to have that much of an impact. And I honestly think he's touchdown dependent as a receiver, because if he doesn't score, I see his stat line being the very old Hunter Renfrow of the NFL, where he gets that 5 catch, 32-yard game. And it's like, yeah, he got 8 points, but he didn't really do too much with those catches. Underneath, you obviously have some interesting plays. I think I'm going to be getting a lot of Josh Wiley for Cincinnati, the tight end, just because Alabama has struggled against tight ends a little bit. Obviously, Brock Bowers went for over 100 yards. Weidermeyer went for 70. I think there's a route where Wiley has a similar type of production in this game and is a contrarian, just 3K play that you can run in your lineups. And then also the other tight end on the other side of things with Jahleel Billingsley. I think those two are my favorite sub 4K options.
Yeah, I think Billingsley makes a lot of sense. Alabama uses a ton of 12 personnel, and when they use Latu and Billingsley's the receiving tight end. They actually use him on like kickoffs and stuff, like kickoff returns, which is crazy. Like he's super athletic. You've probably seen him play on like kickoff returns early in his career. I remember like watching him a couple of years ago, and like I knew him as a depth piece, as like a tight end from Alabama, just because if you play DFS and you work in the space, you know all these guys. I'm like, what the heck is backup tight end Jahleel Billingsley doing returning kickoffs? Like this dude's super athletic. So I think he can kind of fill the role that Mechie leaves behind. Obviously not in a 1-for-1 type way, but if you're looking for a receiving threat at tight end, Billingsley at 3,200 saw 5 targets when Mechie went down as well. So he's 3,200. He's a guy that I like a lot. I am taking a shot on Pickens just as a one-off in a lot of lineups, but if you're running like Corm, I think he makes natural kind of pairing on the other side. Pickens had 5 targets on about a 30% snap share last week. He's 3,900, so he makes a decent amount of sense there. Michigan is kind of tough to get to in this range. Like Roman Wilson is sort of in play. He is about a 60% snap share player, 70%. His targets spike in competitive games, but he's more expensive than both Jahleel Billingsley and Pickens. So he's kind of like specific to lineups that have James Cook or contrarian lineups that are using McNamara, stuff like that. Eric All, their tight ends at 4K. He's also in play too. He's actually the 3rd leading receiver, 4 yards behind Wilson on the year. And then the last situation I want to talk about in this price range is the Alabama wide receiver 3, because there's not clarity on this. JoJo Early was functioning as like a situational receiver early in the year over Ja'Cory Brooks, but he got hurt. Ja'Cory Brooks lately has been like a 60% snap share player. He participated in 60% of the routes in back-to-back weeks to end the season. We're talking about against Georgia in the SEC championship. The guy was on the field a lot, only saw 2 targets, but I mean, cheap attachment to Bryce Young, that could make a lot of people money if he actually plays this role today. The issue is Ja'Cory Brooks was out for those games where he was a 60% of the snap share player. With Early coming back, how does that affect their roles? And to be honest with you guys, like I flat out don't know. I played them both in tournaments just because I like this Alabama offense is by far the most explosive offense that we'll see in the college football playoff. I just want pieces of it. And these guys are going to be low owned because we don't know what their roles are. And there's a chance that they just flat out outscore Jahleel Billingsley because they're a little more dynamic. I straight up don't know, but I am playing them on that premise.
Yeah, with Alabama, like I've obviously watched a ton of Alabama this year. And when it comes to this position, like it's definitely very volatile. Like both of these guys can get a ton of targets. Obviously, Brooks has been healthier, but JoJo Early's gotten healthy when the time's right. I believe when Early was playing, I think the role that he takes more away from is Slade Bolden, because I believe he is more fit to be the slot type of receiver, and Brooks is predominantly on the outside. I think Brooks has a better chance to earn a bigger role for this game, but both of these guys are definitely extremely volatile. When Early played 84 or 88 passing snaps, 74 of those were in the slot. Like he was almost a full-time slot type of player. That is where we're expecting Slade Bolden to roll, who's 89% of his snaps are in the slot. So if Early is going to be the player, I wouldn't be playing him with Bolden. And if you play Baker or Brooks, you can play him with Slade Bolden.
Yeah. So Early was a game time decision. We had no idea whether he's going to play or not. That could be coach speak from Saban. I legit don't know, but game time decisions in the Alabama offense, unless you're like Jerry Jeudy or Devontae Smith, it's typically not a good thing, especially if you're a rotational receiver. Like, I don't think he's going to come on the field and play every single snap, but if he catches a long one or something like that, that's the avenue to him paying off a dirt cheap salary, in my opinion.
Yeah. I know Nakai Watson hasn't been someone you're too fond of. Someone just tweeted out, if 3 yards are blocked, Nakai Watson is sure going to give you 1 yard. And I just, I couldn't help but laugh. But Early is warming up right now from some of the tweets that I've seen from college football. You should definitely give Matt a follow. He retweets those all the time. I've got notifications on for him during college football season. Immediately turn them off when it's college basketball because, you know, not playing college basketball, Matt, you can't make me. It's a nightmare and I'm scared. I mean, the NBA is a nightmare. I can only imagine what it's like for college basketball right now, even though UCF just got a key win. But who is your favorite tournament play today? Who's the guy that, not popular, just give me your low-owned tournament player that you are most fond of?
Man, my low-owned tournament play I'm most fond of. Pickens.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was mine. I mean, if I'm not going Pickens, for me, it's Josh Wiley. Again, Alabama was giving up some big plays.
Let's talk about that. I think we kind of glossed over the Cincinnati receivers and tight ends. So I know you like Pierce, you like Josh Wiley. Explain to me why Josh Wiley is such a preference for you over like Tyler Scott and Michael Young and the other tight end, Leonard Taylor. Why Josh Wiley?
So Wiley on the year has 6 touchdowns. I've seen him have that multiple touchdown type of game when he gets used in this offense. Like in his games that he's had 4 catches, 60 yards, 2 touchdowns, 79 yards, 2 touchdowns. The 2 catch game, 32 yards as a touchdown. I think there's a route for him to get split basically Alabama safeties. We have Josh Jobe not playing makes it so it's a new personnel out there, and we've seen Alabama have mistakes in coverage. And during the year, like some of the bigger tight ends actually were the people who found the end zone against us, where Weidermeyer did it. I believe the tight end was it Beck? Did Beck have a good game against us? Yeah, Josh Beck had a touchdown as well, or Jack Beck, sorry. 5 catch, 33 yards and a touchdown. I think for large field tournaments, Wiley has the best chance to go and score. And at that price and with a 2-game slate, that could be the difference in a lot of tournament outreach.
Yeah, that makes sense. They use a lot of 12 personnel too. I actually have more Leonard Taylor. He just has more targets on the year, but receiving yards is in Wiley's favor. Touchdowns are in Wiley's favor. It just seems like Taylor's run a little bit bad based on his volume. But I like Wiley too. They're going to use 2 tight ends. They're going to use 4 or 5 receivers. I have a lot of Michael Young. He's supposed to be playing in his first game here since he was injured in their 4th most recent game, but he was the wide receiver 2 on the year, like, and basically all metrics, receptions, yards, targets prior to the injury. So Michael Young, I think, is a really nice buy low right now. You're just not 100% sure he plays the same role when he comes back, but ultimately I have more Leonard Taylor and Michael Young, but I do have Wiley too. It's spread pretty evenly between the Cincinnati receivers. When I'm using them, it's run backs to Bryce Young stacks, not using them as one-offs.
Yeah, and also, by the way, it's actually, I think, 6 straight weeks that I'm going through right now that a tight end has scored a touchdown against Alabama. It's Landon King for Auburn did it. I think he might be a fullback, but Blake Kern did it for Arkansas. Beck did it for LSU. I think Tennessee had a tight end score against us as well. We've given up touchdowns to tight end. Oh no, tight end. The Tennessee doesn't play tight ends. When the team has played a tight end in the SEC, we basically just allowed them to go score a touchdown, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising to me. I didn't realize they'd given up so much. I don't think Cincinnati is going to be able to exploit it, but
no, I mean, I think they'll be, again, it's very like for you with Ritter, if Wiley's the one who catches the touchdown and he comes in sub 5% ownership, then you're sitting very pretty in large field GPP, because a lot of the chalk is most likely going to pay off in this specific slate because of just how much better they are compared to the field.
How many lineups did you play?
Right now, 10.
Did you play any McNamara?
No.
Did you play any Stetson?
No.
Okay. Did you play any Ritter?
I did play. I played Ritter in 7. I have 70% Ritter. I have 3 lineups where I do not have the second quarterback. Actually, one of them with JT Daniels. I lied.
Who did you play in the second game?
In the second game, I like a lot of Corum, and for the receivers, it's a ton of George Pickens. I think I'm 90%.
Do you think that game is going to go wildly under-owned? Like, what do you think the ownership should be on some of those players?
I think Pickens should be a lot more owned than he's getting credit.
I just don't know if he's healthy. I think that's why.
I agree, but like on this slate, sub 4K, looking at these guys, like even if he's not 100% healthy, a 3 for 50 line could be the highest scoring guy of any player under 4K.
Look, man, I told you Pickens is my flag plant. Do I feel good about it? Absolutely not. Yeah. I'm playing him based on the fact that we've seen him basically be the potential, I don't know, NFL draft pick at wide receiver for this Georgia team. And he's now getting healthier, but like the dude might play 30% of snaps. That is in the range of outcomes. We just don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, when you look at like Michigan, when they faced the good offenses in the Big Ten, they gave up some points. Like the Ohio State game got really out of hand early on, but they like those receivers and offense, like they still performed. Like all 3 receivers went for over 80 yards. Michigan State, Kenneth Walker ran all over them. They weren't really like they're a great defense, but they've also given up points when playing some of the better competition. So I think Pickens and Bowers are 2 guys that can really exploit it. And if JT Daniels somehow finds his way into this game, and I think both of them could be slate winners.
JT Daniels.
I just can't.
Did you play JT Daniels in the lineup?
Yes, I have JT Daniels. I am wasting that $20.
Is that a showdown lineup or is that
no, legit? I'm in the GPP.
You're doing it.
I am committed to just believing that JT Daniels in a half of football can outscore Cade McNamara in the whole game. I am committed to that, and I just think like if that does happen, Michigan's got some time to adjust, but Daniels is just a much better passer than Stetson Bennett. Like Bennett does the little things, and against Alabama, he had some few key plays, but he also, again, he did turn over the ball twice against us. And if it wasn't for Brock Bowers, I'm not sure he completed many passes.
Do you have any Brock Bowers?
Yes, I have a little bit of Brock. I have like 3 or 4 with him. It was hard to get him in. I agree to you that point.
Yeah, I think so too.
But other than that, guys, do you have anything else we want to touch on before the lock? We got 2 minutes till this game gets started.
Do you have any lineups with 2 backs from the same team?
I have 1 lineup with Corum and Haskins.
I was thinking about doing that with Georgia with Zamir and James, and I have it in a couple, but like literally just a couple.
I think it's just I don't like Zamir White. I don't know. Like I just watched
block on Zamir.
Yeah, I think that's more of a personal bias. I think the only time I've played Zamir White, he just absolutely crushed me. And like he was the one guy that it's like you could have played so many other people. Like I think he was like 6K for one of the slates, and I played him over a lot of the other 5,800 running backs. And he gave me like a 4, and he was cold, and everybody else was fire. I was like, wow, this sucks.
That'll happen sometimes, though.
Yeah, no, it's just, obviously, I just also believe James Cook is just a way better playmaker, and he's not the dude I want to get the freaking between the tackles carries, but get him on a jet sweep, get him on space, let him read a block and cut back, and he can make some big plays against Michigan.
I think that makes sense, but yeah, thank you guys for being here. Have fun watching these games. You too, Jordan. I know you're a big Bama guy. You got your Bama shirt on. Have fun watching the games, man.
No, it's going to be a fun one, man. I appreciate all the work you've done this season. We've got a few bowl games left for the rest of the year, but definitely excited to see who ends up on top of the national championship. Thanks for everybody who came. Subscribe, like to the channel, turn on that notification button. Again, if you're new to PrizePicks, use code Awesemo, give you $100 or match up to $100 in your first deposit. They got a 22x going on right now that I think just locked, but hey, you took advantage of it. It's been fantastic. Later on today, we got a deeper dive with Eric and Adam. We got NBA Live Before Lock with Greg and Terry. Matt, Happy New Year's. Have a good one, buddy.
Thanks, you too, man.
See you guys.